Hi, my name is Ria. I'm from Imperial College London, and this presentation is on the paper titled Formal Verification of Debates in Argumentation Theory. We begin by introducing argumentation frameworks as well as dispute trees. This knowledge is required before we present the methodology for verifying debates. Then finally, we present the results. This includes the main results, which are the formal debate properties that we can verify. And then we look at some experimental results in order to discuss the feasibility of verifying debates using this methodology. We engage in debates and informal discussions frequently and use them to improve our understanding of a problem, and in some cases, even find solutions to resolve them. By verifying such a debate, we can learn about its overall outcome, as well as learn about the strategies available to a participant and determine whether an argument of theirs is considered a good or acceptable argument to make. In this paper, we considered model checking as a technique for verifying debates. Model checking is a verification technique which allows us to determine whether a given system is able to satisfy a specific property. In this case, we begin with our system, which is a debate, and translate it to a model. Then we formalize the properties that we would like to ensure that this debate satisfies. Finally, we can check these formal properties against the model that we've developed. First, we need to be able to represent a debate formally before we can develop a model. Consider a debate between two agents where the first one makes the argument A, the defendant is being framed for murder. The second agent can then attack A with its own argument B, the bloodstains at the crime scene match the blood of the defendant. We can formalize the set of arguments and the attacks between them as an abstract argumentation framework. So we have a pair of a set of arguments as well as the attack relation between them. Using an argumentation framework, we can compute a set of acceptable arguments E. In this paper, we considered multiple acceptability semantics, including admissible, grounded, and ideal. With the admissible set of arguments, we require that no two arguments in the set E also have an attack between them, and that every argument in the set E is acceptable with respect to it. In other words, the set E is able to defend itself against attacks from arguments outside it. For a set of arguments to be considered grounded, it must be the minimal admissible set and contain all of the arguments acceptable with respect to E. This means that the grounded set must also contain all of the arguments in the framework that it's able to defend. Finally, for a set of arguments to be ideal, it needs to be admissible as well as be a subset of all maximal admissible sets with respect to set inclusion. Given the argumentation framework, we can decide whether an argument A is acceptable or not using dispute trees. This is a tree of arguments with the root A, where the agents, the proponent and the opponent, take turns to attack each other with an argument, which is chosen based on the attack relation in the given framework. As an example, we have this argumentation framework, and we would like to figure out whether A is acceptable. The proponent will always play the first argument A, and the opponent will attack next with B, as this is present in the attack relation. The proponent will attack again with C and D, and this can continue until either agent has run out of arguments. In some cases, you might even have infinite branches, such as the rightmost branch, where both agents attack the other's arguments forever. We can see in this example that the proponent is non-deterministic and has the choice to attack the argument B with either C or D. We could say that, in this case, the proponent has two strategies available, and it's possible that one of them could be used to win the debate and prove that A is an acceptable argument. Once the proponent selects a strategy, we can build a subtree where it behaves deterministically. By looking at the properties of such a subtree, we can decide whether the current strategy is a winning strategy. In this paper, we looked at three different kinds of winning strategies: grounded, admissible, and ideal. The subtrees resulting from applying each of these strategies have different kinds of properties, and we will cover these properties in more detail later in the presentation. If we return to our example, we can see that we can extract two subtrees, where in the first one, the proponent chooses the argument C, and in the second one, it chooses the argument D. We can now translate this dispute tree to a model otherwise known as an interpreted system. Interpreted system is essentially a finite set of states which can be used to represent the behavior of agents in the system over time. Given a dispute tree T and its argumentation framework, we now look at the translation from dispute trees to interpreted systems. Within a dispute tree, we have two agents, the proponent and the opponent. In the interpreted system, we also keep a third special agent, the environment. The proponent and the opponent both have a set of private local states which store their most recently played argument. The opponent also has a possible state empty to indicate that it hasn't yet played any arguments. The environment is used to store the most recently played argument, which could be by either agent, as well as store which agent's turn it is to play next. Finally, the environment also keeps a subset of the attack relation to track the progression of the debate over time. The local state of the environment is public. The proponent and the opponent also each have a set of actions which correspond to an element in the attack relation. All three agents also have the action epsilon, which is equivalent to taking no action at all. Both agents also have a protocol function, which looks at its current local state and the environments and returns the set of actions that they're allowed to take next. For the proponent, we first check whether it is its turn to play and return the set of actions corresponding to an attack on the most recently played argument. The opponent's protocol is very similar, whereas the protocol for the environment always returns the action epsilon. The proponent and the opponent both have a transition function which updates their local states to their most recently played arguments and is based on the actions taken by all three agents in the system. Whereas the transition function of the environment updates its local state to indicate which agent's turn it is to play next, and also updates the most recently played argument in the debate. As an example, we can translate this dispute tree to an interpreted system where each state is a combination of the local states of all three agents and their evolution depends on the actions taken by all of them. Each state is also associated with a propositional atom to indicate the most recently played argument and the agent that played it. Given such an interpreted system, we can now check certain debate properties against it. As mentioned earlier, we looked at three different kinds of winning strategies, where each of the subtrees generated from applying these strategies have different properties. We begin with the grounded winning strategy. Under the grounded winning strategy, all opponent nodes in the subtree must have exactly one child, and this tree must only have finite branches. Looking at our running example, we can extract these two subtrees and find that the one on the left corresponds to a grounded winning strategy as it's able to satisfy both these properties. We would now like to formalize the two properties and verify that such a subtree exists in the original dispute tree. We formalize these properties using ATL, or alternating time temporal logic allows you to reason about the strategies available to the proponent in an interpreted system. When the proponent selects a strategy, we end up with a subset of paths in the system that correspond to a subtree. Consider the following property as an example. The proponent has a strategy such that it eventually plays the argument I. This property is satisfied by the path highlighted on the right. We can express this as in the slide below. The proponent has a strategy sigma where every single path in the resulting subset contains a state where the proponent plays the argument I. We can use ATL to formalize the dispute tree properties of a grounded winning strategy. We say that the proponent has a grounded winning strategy in the tree T if and only if the interpreted system can satisfy this formula, which says that the proponent has a strategy sigma such that the resulting subset of paths will eventually reach a state where an argument played by the proponent is the final argument. Next, we look at the admissible winning strategy. In this case, the subtree must not consist of arguments played by both agents, and again, every opponent node must have exactly one child. In this example, we have two subtrees, and we find that actually both of the proponent strategies are admissible, as neither tree contains arguments played by both agents and each proponent node has exactly one child. Again, we would like to use the interpreted system to verify that such a subtree exists in the original dispute tree. To formalize these two properties, we use strategy logic, as we find that ATL has a limitation where it does not allow you to quantify strategies, which in this case is required. We are now using the interpreted system to verify the following. The proponent has a single strategy that is able to satisfy the conjunction of formulae phi1 and 2. Phi1 corresponds to the dispute tree property that every opponent node has exactly one child, or in other words, the proponent is able to counterattack every argument played by the opponent, whereas Phi2 corresponds to the property that no argument is played by both agents in the resulting subtree. Finally, we look at the ideal winning strategy. For a strategy sigma to be ideal, it must also be an admissible winning strategy. Also, the subtree generated by applying the strategy must not contain an opponent node that has an admissible winning strategy. So in this example, if we look at the strategy on the left, we already know this is an admissible strategy from the previous examples where the opponent plays the argument B. Now, if we look at the subtree on the left with B as the root of the tree, we find that the proponent is able to win by attacking B with C. Therefore, the opponent node B has no admissible strategy. This means that the subtree highlighted in green corresponds to an ideal winning strategy. The other strategy, where the proponent attacks B with D, is not admissible, as the opponent also plays the argument E, which has an admissible winning strategy. We are now looking at the formalization, which says that the proponent has a strategy which satisfies the conjunction of phi 1, 2, and 3, where phi 1 and 2 are the same as the formulae presented in Theorem 2, whereas phi 3 expresses that there is no such opponent node with a strategy which is able to satisfy the admissible dispute tree properties. Finally, we collected some experimental results to discuss the feasibility of model checking debates. We used randomly generated argumentation frameworks to measure the performance of MC-Mass, which is an open source model checker, and compared its performance to that of other argumentation solvers. We begin by looking at the performance of MC-Mass in verifying the existence of a grounded winning strategy. We used MC-Mass to generate interpreted systems for frameworks of different sizes and structures, determined by the probability of attack between arguments. We checked against these interpreted systems the ATL formula based on the framework and the formalization presented earlier. As expected, MC-Mass was slower than the argumentation solver, as it's a more general-purpose model checker. With the larger frameworks, we timed out MC-Mass after half an hour, as we found that it spent most of its execution time generating the set of states in the system before it could actually reach the model checking step. For verifying the existence of an admissible winning strategy, we had to use significantly smaller argumentation frameworks, as we found that MC-Mass eventually ran out of memory when performing the model checking step, which may have been due to the structure of the framework. As with a higher probability, you are more likely to have a larger attack relation, and therefore there would be more strategies for MC-Mass to consider. The results were very similar for the ideal winning strategy, except that we found more memory errors, possibly because this time round the size of the formulae were much greater compared to the formulae used when checking for admissible winning strategies. As expected, we found that the size and the structure of the framework had a significant impact on the execution time. The structure especially, as this determines the number of choices or strategies available to the proponent. To summarize, in this paper we provided a translation from dispute trees to interpreted systems. We also formalized the properties for the 3 different types of dispute trees, and finally we collected some experimental results to discuss how the size and structure of an argumentation framework can have an impact on the execution time of MC Mass. Thank you.